Oh, I am Bill Blitch. Once I had run for the board, I had served in several capacities, and I had actually once my 4 years was up and had to sit out a while, I was immediate past president. So I had 2 terms as immediate past president and then another 4 years. So I had a good long tenure. So I was on the board. I guess the most important challenge was growth, how to deal with growth, how to contain it if necessary. I remember distinctly South Padre as one of the more frequently and well enjoyed conventions. We were stumbling over each other during the vendor programs because all they could put it in was in the hallways, and no one could move. We had that many people there, and recognized that we could no longer go there. We were just getting too big, which was a real shame because we were hoping that they would be expanding their convention facilities. Alas, that never came to a vote with the folks, so no bonds were issued. They didn't do it. But one of the things that we were looking at was limiting registration, which would have been difficult, especially since we were looking at some growth and fostering a little bit of growth. The other main challenge I think we had was one that continues to this day, and that's legislation. Getting the legislation committee to become a real force with the biennial legislators and try to keep some of these rules and regulations from being imposed upon us as water districts. That continues to this day, of course. And that was, I think that's the main thing that we were really looking at as far as challenges were concerned. One of the biggest risks, of course, was once we had experienced growth that was going to start curtailing some of the venues because they were just too small for us. We went to New Orleans. We got an awful lot of feedback about that. Most of the constituents were very, very happy about it and wanted to go back, and we did, of course, schedule several years later another one to New Orleans. Alas, a hurricane sort of interfered with that. But we did not see anything wrong with going out of state. A lot of the attorneys felt otherwise. And that was a risk that I think cost us a little bit of credibility with legislators, with some of the bigger attorney firms. Another one was encouraging and trying to get greater membership outside of the Gulf Coast area. That contributed primarily to the surge in growth. We had a huge growth, of course, with more and more water districts being created naturally. But going outside and trying to bring in the Austin group, the North Texas, the West Texas, that gave us problems. Central Texas, of course, did have some real problems, and with joining, or they decided to do their own deal. So that gave us a little bit of a decrease in our volume. Setting the rules for conventions and conventioneers was always a difficult risk. We had to impose limits at one point, certainly in not having enough room in a very popular seminar, limits in terms of registration at hotels. Mary Leonard was We didn't have real good computer facilities at that time. So to suddenly find somebody showing up that hadn't registered and wanted to be registered at the hotel entailed a great deal of time and effort on management's part to get that done. So at one point they curtailed that. And I was lucky enough to be president at the time that was first inaugurated, and had to talk down some very irate people that drove all the way to Corpus. And why were they being turned away? Not a very fun thing. And of course there's the perennial problems of turn off your cell phones while the seminar is going on. I imagine to this day that's not very well received. And those are some of the risks that came to mind. Probably proudest of, before I was on the board, I was working with one of the board members, and we had looked around and watched all the programs for all these many years be duplicated over and over and over, just a set number of them. And we got to thinking that, we really needed to expand what we were doing. And we wound up actually putting together a sheet of paper with questions on it. What programs would you like to see? What should we address? Various other things like that. We passed around at lunch during one of the conventions and got a bunch of feedback and used those as the model to determine what the program committee was going to deal with the next year. That continued on. It got expanded to where we actually passed those sheets out prior to each program with a box at the end of the exit to deposit what you thought about it, what you would like to see next year, various things like that. Really aggressively going to the membership and seeing what they wanted to see. And that expanded pretty greatly the operations of the program committee, which I thought was a good idea. Another thing in the programs, once I got on the board, and I think by the time I became president, I had decided that it would be a real good idea to move the program chairman away from the trustees and into the advisory council to make sure that regardless of who was president, who was on the board, it would be actually someone that's on the ground more than board members might be to get the programs put together. When I got elected to the board, evidently I was the first consultant, water district consultant, to run for the board in quite a few years. I think when it started, all the board members were consultants because that was how it was being formed. And then it sort of changed into strictly board members. And I got so much criticism from some of the old trustees that had the ex-trustees asking, why did I even think it was a good idea to run for the board? By that time I had been playing with the program committee for a goodly while, and I thought I was capable of getting in there.